Mr. Huseynov, thank you very much for speaking with the Voice of America's Armenian service today. You're in Washington, D.C. and in the U.S. Together with the British non-profit organization called Conciliation Resources. Just a couple of words about the visit and what is the main purpose of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, basically, Conciliation Resources organized a series of events dedicated to South Caucasus, and we are here, one Azerbaijani, myself, one Armenian, that's Masis Ismailian, one Georgian participant, and one Abkhaz. Mm-hmm. And we're attending a series of events dedicated to the conflicts in the South Caucasus. We've been yesterday at George Mason University. There was a small seminar about South Caucasus, and we've been talking about our conflicts. Mm-hmm. Today, after this interview, we're attending another seminar in Brookings Institute, also about the prospects for peace in South Caucasus conflicts. And then, after Washington, we will be going to New York to attend annual convention of the Association of the Study of Nationalities. And there, myself and Masis Ismailian, my colleague, we will be presenting a paper, our papers, respective papers on return and their alternatives in the context of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've been basically involved in the conflict in different ways: track 2 diplomacy, public diplomacy, publications in academic and other spheres. You personally, where do you think today the negotiations over the conflict stand? Is there a deadlock, as many say, although there are meetings between the two presidents of Armenia and Azerbaijan, most often in Moscow recently, or in the Russian context? Is this going anywhere, or is this just an imitation of a process?
I would say the conflicts are, if not in deadlock, but certainly in a limbo. Basically, we have a situation whereby both sides have discussed extensively over the course of the past years the so-called basic principles. Last year in mid-February, as you may know, Azerbaijan officially endorsed these basic principles.
Armenian. Did it call it renewed basic principles or basic principles? There's a confusion there.
There is indeed confusion, and there is updated principles. This is a live document. They change it. However, we should definitely bear in mind that the fundamentals of the basic principles have been the same over the course of many years. And these fundamentals have been revealed in the joint statements of the three co-chair countries' presidents in 2009 in L'Aquila and in 2010 in Muskoka. And the framework is out there. The main disagreements now concern, as far as I know, concern the timelines and modalities, certain modalities that have to do with withdrawal and the determination of the final status. But my personal perception is that, my personal understanding and reading of the situation is that the main problem today concerns not that much the substance of the basic principles, which is basically some 14 points and 1.5 page document. So very, very general framework. The main problem is not with this document, but the main problem is with the domestic circumstances and the situations within Armenia and within Azerbaijan. Basically, we have this intransigent attitudes in both societies and in both establishments, political establishments. War rhetoric certainly complicates a lot of things. Incidents in the front line, they further distract us away from the political resolution of the problem. So that these problems are the main problems. And what we need is indeed having more constructive discussions on the basic principles. But before that, we also need to make sure that we have some sort of stabilization in the front line so that people are not get killed. Because with every person killed, whether that is Armenian or Azerbaijani civilian or a serviceman, with every person getting got killed in this conflict, the prospects of peaceful resolution becomes even more distant. So we need to make sure that somehow we stabilize the situation in the front line, but we also should understand that stabilization in the front line is not an end goal in itself. It's an instrument in order, which we can use and we should use to prepare grounds for political breakthrough in the peace talks.
Former assistant to the former co-chairman of Minsk Group, the U.S. co-chairman to Minsk Group, Perino's assistant Jeff Goldstein, just a couple of weeks ago was speaking about the period of time when he was involved in the process, and he was saying that his boss back in the day, while being at the first meeting between Robert Kocan and Ilham Aliyev, saw from their body language that basically the two leaders are fine with the status quo and are basically showing that, well, you don't rock my boat, I don't rock your boat, we just keep this going with the international community. Well, we have been seeing a long-going negotiation process with basically very few results, if at all. Do you think it's been true, and do you think it's true now? What I mean by this is the status quo politically is basically good for both leaders, or both political leaderships.
Well, I think when talking about status quo, we can see that definitely for majority of Armenians and Armenian politicians and official Yerevan, status quo is perceived as a means for achieving a fait accompli resolution. So that is certainly very visible from outside. With many Azerbaijanis, on ordinary level, many Azerbaijanis are certainly much more unhappier with the status quo than many Armenians, if to take in general. Because many Azerbaijanis are afraid that the protraction of the status quo means that there will be lesser chances that Azerbaijan will ever regain its lost territories, and the Azerbaijanis displaced from these territories, there is less likelihood that they will return to their homes. You're right that several years ago, at least, in recent history, Azerbaijani leadership was also actually saying that time is on their side. As time passes by, Azerbaijan gets more powerful, and therefore it will be easier for Azerbaijan to achieve its goals, as it perceives it, in the future than now. But I feel that that perception among the leadership in Baku is also changing. There is gradually this negotiation fatigue in Azerbaijan, including in the official couloirs, with the status quo. Azerbaijan, as you may recall, official Baku threatened to walk out from talks if there is no results. Whether Azerbaijani government is going to act on these threats or not, that's another issue. But the very fact that Azerbaijan is actively pursuing a policy aimed at changing of the status quo and is actively instrumentalizing certain tensions in the front line, and at the same time also stepping up diplomatic and political pressure on Armenia, means that Azerbaijani government indeed genuinely interested in change of the status quo.
When we say the change of status quo, we hear both from both leadership, but more often from the Azerbaijani leadership, enormous war rhetoric. Basically, there is no other week that passes, and Armenian leadership answers in so many different ways, without saying, well, you go on like this, we're getting more military capacity, and we're going to take it over by war. Does the status quo, in your opinion, for the Azerbaijani leadership mean basically gaining lands and or power back by war, by another war? And so, just 2 years ago, a colleague of yours from International Crisis Group, Sabina Fraser, wrote an op-ed at Boston Globe saying that by 2012, Azerbaijani oil reserves are going to start going down, and that's the period of time when we can have a more likelihood of war. So, what about this? Is this a possible change of war? Because what's happening from one side is there is confidence building between you, Mr. Mailian, and others trying to basically prepare the publics for some kind of resolution. But on the top political level, we see a very different rhetoric.
No, certainly the rhetoric that is coming from both sides is not helpful. This kind of rhetoric is complicating the peace talks, are raising the emotions, and this kind of rhetoric also has a very negative spillover effect on the populations of Armenia and Azerbaijan. So certainly both sides need to tone down their rhetoric and be a bit more patient. However, it seems that Azerbaijani government is unhappy with the fact that whereas it has accepted the internationally backed proposals, Armenian government has not come into terms with these proposals yet. Basically, official Yerevan's position was much more ambiguous. They say that we accept the basic principles as framework for discussion, but framework for discussion does not really amount to endorsement of these basic principles. So Azerbaijan, many people in Azerbaijan and Azerbaijani government as well feel that what Armenians and what Armenian government is trying to do is to just endlessly drag on the negotiations and make sure that there will be no progress. That's the perception, whether right or wrong. And it's very important that to prove that Armenian government indeed actually wants to achieve a political resolution based on compromise. And it's very important that both sides actually back off from the discussions on what the final status should be and think in more practical terms, how they can find out certain interim measures in order to provide for greater security and in order to provide for greater possibility for coexistence between Armenians and Azerbaijanis.
One last question, which relates basically again to the details of the negotiations. We had a phenomenon, a new idea of the interim status and all that. You mentioned just now that refraining from the status discussion now would be more helpful at the moment to basically ensure some mechanisms that would create better security for both sides. From your own work in this context, where do you think are the areas where the sides can basically agree on creating mechanisms for security? Let's say taking out the snipers, a discussion that has been going on, or exchanging the prisoners. What are possible means that could ensure for both sides there is some kind of positive light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, certainly big success comes with small steps. And the small steps certainly can be certain confidence building measures in the front line in order to make sure that we don't have unnecessary complications in the peace process itself. And as you mentioned, certainly withdrawal of snipers is one of these possible confidence building measures. Joint investigation of incidents that Armenian and Azerbaijani presidents have agreed to in the recent Sochi meeting is another possible confidence building measure. There may be some other measures that the sides can come up to. But we need to make sure that these measures are building blocks for certain progress, for certain subsequent progress in the peace talks. You mentioned the interim status. I think there is a value, there is certainly a value of in discussions about what kind of interim status there can be for Nagorno-Karabakh. There is certainly need to elaborate what this can be and what Armenian and Azerbaijani interests may be in actually supporting that kind of interim status. But this is something that we need to delve into unofficially as scholars, as policy shapers. But the immediate policy goal should be really to agree on the basic principles, which is a very general, as I said, very general framework. There is fundamental misperception in both Armenian and Azerbaijani societies that an agreement on the basic principles will be an end of something big. In fact, the agreement on basic principles will be just a very small beginning of a very long pass. And it will not follow with any concrete, actually, withdrawal or alleviation of any consequences of the conflict. So we really need to have more pragmatic and constructive discussions on the basic principles in both Armenian and Azerbaijani principles, so that people also would understand the value of this compromise that is being proposed to them, and would start to actually creatively approaching this issue in order to provide for future peace and coexistence.
Thank you, Mr. Huseynov. Thanks for spending time with us at Voice of America
Thank you for the
today.
invitation.